Hi, I'm Stephanie Carson. I'm the News and Community Partnerships Manager for Carolina Public Press. And we've been offering you a full library of really detail-oriented topics having to do with this upcoming 2020 election. So we hope you've had a chance to look through that library, examine the topics that are most interesting or relevant to you. But we also wanted to sit down with Jordan Wilkie, who's our reporter this year covering on the elections at Carolina Public Press, just to ask a few questions to make sure we're all on the same page. And have some good takeaways from this whole thing. And you know, first, I guess the best question right now, Jordan, is what can North Carolina do between now and November to ensure election security in our state?
Well, I think the first point is that North Carolina has already taken a number of actions to improve the cybersecurity stance of both counties and the state. They're going to release their election security plan very soon to counties and improve that draft. And that'll be available to all of us to really see and scrutinize. And along that line, increased transparency for what counties and the state agencies are doing to provide protection is a very important part of securing the election, because part of election security is having trust and faith in the institutions that are carrying out the democratic process. Another step that the state is doing to help secure elections is to put in place a certain type of audit that is seen as very important to catching types of, as we talked about in the training, subversive attacks or attacks on the actual machines involved in carrying out the election, you know, in a worst case scenario to change vote tallies. The types of audits that North Carolina will be putting in place with their goal by November 2020 would catch those types of issues.
That's right. And I think the biggest important thing is, you know, there is risk, obviously, you know, in an upcoming election, making sure that we have security. But the important thing is to vote. You know, the message is not to sit home and not vote.
Any attack on an election, any threat of an attack, any perception, all of that is really enhanced when people decide that they don't want to participate in the democratic process. The number one way to combat the attacks on an election are to participate for yourself, to become a poll worker, to volunteer your time, to help other people access the vote. That kind of really broad participation in the election is the number one type of security that we can really encourage.
And one thing that I've learned just from hearing you, and as well as, you know, watching the coverage of the Iowa caucus issue, is that there's always a paper trail. So even if there is an issue, there are multiple ways that our votes are protected at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And North Carolina actually improved the process for having a paper trail by decertifying old machines in December of last year and bringing in new equipment. There has been some debate around the security of that equipment, but it is fairly undeniable that that is an improvement over what was available before. And with bringing in new procedures and new audits, that it should be much more secure. In addition, we'll have an increased number of counties that are voting using hand-marked paper ballots. And for federal agencies, that is just, and independent researchers, that is seen as the gold standard. So North Carolina is definitely making steps towards improving their election security and election defense.
That's great. And you know, we talked about this, but in terms of at the polls, what should people do at the polls with some of the knowledge that you've offered us in this training?
Mm-hmm. Because this is a systematic issue, a very broad issue, it's difficult for any individual voter to be able to go to the polls and catch something and make a big difference. It is still important for people to pay close attention to what happens when they vote. One very important thing to do is through any number of reasons, through errors, through mistakes that voters make on accident, when they're using a voting machine or when marking a ballot by hand, to definitely check the ballot before they submit it, to make sure that the voting machine prints out a ballot with all the same selections that the voter wants. That's really, really key. And if a voter ever notices anything at all that's out of place, to report that to a precinct official, an election official, and make sure that they create some sort of paper trail so that reporters like me, election officials later on, that candidate campaigns and other watchdogs can follow that paper trail and figure out what really happened. You know, the old adage, if you see something, say something, and say it in the moment. don't leave a polling place before you issue a complaint or ask for a new ballot.
And there are also watchdog groups that are available during the primary and the election. That with a quick Google search, you can find the number to call if you'd like further assistance.
Absolutely, and we are also available to help follow up on tips. And the last thing is that voters should be as informed as possible about where they're voting and their options for voting for mail-in absentee ballots or voting early in person and voting on election day. That kind of information can be found on the State Board of Elections website or with a Google search for voter search State Board of Elections, and they'll be able to check their own voter registration. Voter registration closes about 25 days before any election, so people need to be very proactive in making sure that they are registered to vote at their current address before an election day.
And last thing, just for folks to understand, we've had a lot of discussion in North Carolina about voter ID, not voter ID. For March in the primary, we do not have to have a photo ID.
That's right. There was a legal case brought against North Carolina's voter ID, photo ID requirements, and the court put an injunction on that, which means until the court lifts that injunction or reaches a decision, that the photo ID requirements are not in effect. So at least for our March primaries, photo ID is not required, though that could potentially change for November.
And something I've learned in recent months is that the provisional ballot, if you go and you're told you're at the wrong precinct or you don't have the proper paperwork, if you're challenged in any way, you can request a provisional ballot and you are within your rights to receive one. Is that correct?
That is correct. You're always able to cast a ballot. Provisional ballots have different procedures for how they're decided and whether or not they count for the ultimate vote. So there is an added burden to the voter who casts a provisional ballot. They need to follow up and pay very close attention to what the requirements are for making sure that their votes are counted as cast. Yeah,
that's great. That's good to know. I don't think a lot of people know about that. That opportunity. At least you have an opportunity to have your vote registered, and then you can debate whether or not it should be counted at a later time. So thank you so much. We encourage you all to take a look through our various training that we have on these topics. Also, stay on carolinapublicpress.org, subscribe to our newsletter to get the latest coverage, and we'll be hearing from Jordan's reporting all year long. So thank you so much.